The echo of his laughter froze in the air, mutating into a silent spasm of horror. When the woman he had chosen for her fortune, her eyes dilated like a frightened deer, uttered a name that left him breathless, that of his own mother. Aurora had felt the weight of invisibility since the day Marcos, the man she had loved with the purest devotion, had stripped her of her heart and her future with the same indifference with which a withered flower is discarded. His words, cold and sharp as glacier ice, still resonated in the corners of her modest two-room apartment, where the sun barely dared to peek through. "You're a burden, Aurora. My path is not yours. I need a bigger life." These phrases, delivered with the cruel precision of a scalpel, had not only robbed her of breath, but had left an open wound in the center of her chest, one that throbbed with the stinging pain of betrayal and humiliation. Her hands, once soft and accustomed to the delicate work of her manuscript restoration workshop, were now rough and reddened by the countless hours dedicated to cleaning other people's homes, where the scent of bleach and wax was the persistent reminder of her new, precarious existence. Looking in the mirror, she saw not the glow of youth, but the shadow of deep weariness, tinged with the sadness that had nestled deep in her eyes, transforming her lively gaze into a pool of stillness. The clothes she wore, once meticulously chosen, were now mere rags, worn by use and washing, a sad allegory of the dignity she felt fraying. The contempt was not limited to Marcos's words. It was a constant, an undercurrent that permeated every interaction in her new reality. The whispered comments in the neighborhood, the furtive glances of pity or judgment at the grocery store, all contributed to the feeling of being an outcast, a woman marked by abandonment. There goes poor Aurora, the one Mr. de la Vega's son left for a society lady, she had heard one day at the market, a whisper that pierced her back like 1,000 invisible needles. Her face tightened, her lips pressed into a thin line, trying to contain the avalanche of pain that threatened to overflow. The knot in her throat was so thick she could barely swallow, and her hands trembled slightly, barely perceptible to others, but volcanic within her. It was a daily humiliation, a constant drip of contempt that accumulated layer by layer on her already battered self-esteem. The ignored corners of her apartment, where dust accumulated in the absence of her dreams, were a reflection of her own existence, relegated to the margins, forgotten by the world she had once shared with Marcos. The very air seemed heavy, dense with indifference and judgment. Marcos had never understood Aurora's true passion, her obsession with old papyri, as he used to say with a condescending smile. Aurora possessed an extraordinary ability, an almost mystical sensitivity to the past. She was an exceptional self-taught paleographer, with an innate talent for deciphering ancient scripts, even the most intricate and time-damaged ones. Furthermore, she had a prodigious memory for historical details, an ability to connect seemingly unconnected threads of genealogies and events that most experts took years to unravel. She had honed this skill by helping her grandmother, an elderly librarian, to catalog and restore the family library, a collection of centuries-old documents, many of them personal and containing secrets. Marcos had seen her spend hours, entire days, immersed in reading faded parchments, deciphering symbols and abbreviations with a concentration that exasperated him. "You should invest your time in something productive, Aurora. Something that makes money," he had reproached her one afternoon, with a tone of annoyance. He saw the dust of old books as dirt, and the knowledge she extracted from them as useless eccentricity. Despite the oppression that surrounded her, deep down, Aurora felt that her mind was an impregnable sanctuary, a place where her true worth resided. There was a flame of dignity that burned stubbornly, fueled by the very injustice that sought to extinguish it. She felt the pain, yes, a constant and sharp pang, but also a nascent rage that began to solidify into an iron determination. "They won't break me," she repeated to herself as she polished the gleaming surface of a stranger's table, seeing her own distorted reflection in the varnish. Why had she allowed her life to crumble so easily, her worth to be trampled? The knot in her throat tightened each time the image of Marcos with his new rich fiancée, Valeria, assailed her mind. Her heart, though aching, beat with a rhythm that began to find a new cadence. A mixture of resignation and a latent challenge, frustration propelled her, transforming despair into a silent engine. She promised herself that, somehow, she would rise. Not for him, but for herself. To prove that she was not a burden, but a human being with an intrinsic, incalculable, and irrefutable value. Aurora's life had been tinged with an opaque gray, a monochromatic palette where each day was an exhausting repetition of humiliations and efforts. Her daily routines found her waking before dawn, the morning cold seeping into her bones as she prepared for her cleaning day, the scent of disinfectant permeating her clothes and skin. Then, the endless hours scrubbing floors in offices that radiated an opulence she could barely look at without feeling a pang of bitterness in her chest. The contemptuous comments were not isolated, but a constant chorus. One day, as she polished a display case in a luxury boutique, she saw a group of her former friends from society, laughing and trying on expensive dresses. One of them, Camilla, saw her, and her eyes fixed on Aurora with a mix of surprise and mockery. "Look, it's Aurora. Are you doing this now? I thought you were the group's intellectual, always with your old books," she said with a sharp, contemptuous laugh, loud enough for Aurora to hear. Aurora felt a shiver of shame and rage run through her body, her cheeks flushed, and a sharp pain pierced her chest. Her hands, gripping the cleaning cloth, trembled visibly. "I won't give them the satisfaction," she repeated in her mind, gritting her teeth and continued cleaning, though her eyes clouded with unshed tears. It was an act of silent resistance, a refusal to crumble in front of them. Every taunt, every disdainful look was a stab. And Aurora felt the pain accumulating within her, transforming into a heavy burden. The monotony of her existence was a suffocating blanket, each day a test of endurance. The luxury of the environment in which she worked, the shine of polished metals, the scent of expensive perfumes, contrasted brutally with the modesty of her life, accentuating the injustice that choked her. She could see Marcos in the press, in society magazines, smiling next to Valeria, radiant at gala events, their opulence screaming from the glossy pages. He had chosen the seed of change, the first thread of Ariadne in her labyrinth of pain, appeared in the most prosaic and, at the same time, the most enigmatic form. A box of old papers that her grandmother, already very ill and with her memory fading, handed to her one afternoon with a deep sigh and a look of unexpected lucidity. "These are your origins, my child," the old woman murmured, her bony fingers clinging to Aurora's arm with surprising strength. "The truth is here, the truth about us, and about them." The them resonated in Aurora's mind with a pang of premonition. The box, dusty and tied with a frayed rope, contained not only the manuscripts her grandmother had restored, but also a small leather-bound diary, yellowed and almost illegible, written in an ancient script that Aurora immediately recognized as that of her great-grandmother. The first entries were mundane, descriptions of her great-grandmother's daily life. But suddenly, a date and a name stopped her cold. March 12th, 1948. I received the letter from Alejandro de la Vega. The name of Alejandro de la Vega, Marcos's father. A shiver ran down her spine. Her great-grandmother and Marcos's grandfather. What connection could there be? Her analytical mind, accustomed to unraveling complicated family trees, immediately sprang into action, despite initial doubt. She spent the next hours, and then days, immersed in reading, her initial skepticism giving way to a growing fascination. The diary revealed a story of clandestine love, of broken promises, and of an illegitimate child, fruit of the passion between her great-grandmother and Alejandro de la Vega, who had been secretly given to another family to protect the reputation of the powerful de la Vega lineage. A lost branch of the de la Vega family, hidden by honor and money. Aurora felt a shock that left her breathless. No, it couldn't be. Disbelief hit her with the force of a punch, and her hands trembled as she turned the pages. The child's date of birth, the details of his delivery, the initials of the adoptive family. Everything pointed to one direction, to a truth that seemed incredible to her. And suddenly, a name jumped from the pages, a name her great-grandmother had written in shaky, almost illegible calligraphy, but which Aurora, with her paleographic skill, managed to decipher with chilling certainty. The surname of the family that adopted the child was Altamirano. The spark of hope she had felt transformed into a furious fire of determination. This was not just a genealogical discovery. It was an Ariadne's thread that connected her directly to Marcos and his family. The truth about her great-grandmother's relationship with Alejandro de la Vega, the secret of a son who had grown up under another surname, the weight of a generational lie. The possibility that Marcos and Valeria. Her mind resisted completing the thought, but the logic was relentless. Her heart pounded with fury, a mixture of pain, rage, and nascent justice. She felt her blood boil in her veins. Could it be? Could it be that Marcos, the man who had abandoned her, was about to commit such an act without knowing it? The discovery of this secret buried by time had not only ignited a spark within her, but had rekindled the fire of her pride, the conviction that truth, however painful, must always come to light. The process of unearthing the truth became for Aurora a meticulous obsession, a silent crusade that consumed every hour of her free life, transforming her pain into a relentless engine. It was not just about an inheritance, but about a profound vindication, an act of justice for her great-grandmother and for herself. The first step was to visit the civil archives, a tedious and frustrating task. The old birth and marriage certificates, guarded in dusty rooms, demanded infinite patience. The constant hum of the fans was the only company during those long afternoons. Her eyes, accustomed to ancient calligraphy, became exhausted by the end of the day. But she persisted. She searched for records of the era, cross-referencing names, dates that might match those in her great-grandmother's diary. Frustration hit her when she found several Alejandro de la Vegas, and the trail of the illegitimate son vanished in a sea of bureaucracy and deliberate omissions. This is a wall, she thought, resting her forehead on a pile of files, smelling the scent of old paper and dampness. Tears threatened to fall, but the memory of Marcos's disdainful face spurred her on, a cold fury nesting in her chest. Phone calls became a constant in her life, sometimes with skeptical interlocutors, other times with elderly people who vaguely remembered old gossips. One of her calls, to a nursing home in a remote village, connected her with an old governess who had worked for the de la Vegas, a woman with a fragile memory but with flashes of lucidity. The old woman vaguely recalled a family secret, a child who had disappeared. Although her words were confused, They provided Aurora with small threads that led her to other archives, to old municipal libraries where she found obituaries and newspaper clippings from the time that confirmed the existence of an adopted son by a family with the initials AMA and VA, which Aurora, with a shiver, connected to the Altamiranos. Secret observation became part of her routine. She dressed discreetly, blending into the crowd, and followed members of the De La Vega and Altamirano families at public events, trying to find some connection, some physical coincidence, some detail that would confirm her suspicions. She sat in cafes near their offices, observing their interactions. One afternoon, in a park, she saw Marcos and Valeria walking, laughing, their gestures so similar that it made her stomach churn. The same way of crossing their arms, the same gesture of running a hand through their hair. Her internal monologue was a whirlwind. It can't be. It can't be. But the evidence is so strong. How would Marcos react? And Valeria? This would destroy them. Do I have the right to do this? But what about the truth? What about justice for my great-grandmother? Doubt gnawed at her, but the thirst for truth was stronger. The training was as rigorous as the research. To obtain certain evidence, Aurora had to learn how to use document editing programs to digitally restore damaged texts, and to use basic forensic software to analyze metadata in old files. She spent entire nights in online courses, her computer the only light in the darkness of her apartment. Her eyes burned, her back ached, but every small skill acquired was one more step. There were moments of deep despair, like when software crashed and she lost hours of work. My God, I can't do this anymore, she lamented, hands over her face, feeling exhaustion down to her bones. But then, the image of Marcos's arrogant smile, the humiliation in his eyes, spurred her to restart, to keep searching. The collection of evidence became obsessive. She found an old will of a distant De La Vega relative that made a cryptic reference to a secret child, and in a hospital archive, the record of a birth in a rural clinic on the date indicated in the diary, under a false name, but with the stamp of the doctor who attended the De La Vega family. Each discovery was a small triumph, another piece in the intricate puzzle. She felt herself transforming from a victim to a truth hunter, her intellect her most powerful weapon. Every piece is crucial, she repeated to herself. I cannot fail. This is bigger than me. It's for the truth. In her relentless quest, Aurora found two unexpected souls who became beacons in the darkness of her mission. Pillars of support who believed in her when no one else did. The first was Clara, a retired historian whom Aurora contacted after finding her name in an academic publication on hidden genealogies. Clara, a woman in her 70s, with lively eyes and a mind even sharper than many young people, had dedicated her life to unearthing silenced stories. At first, the interaction was formal, an exchange of emails about paleography. But when Aurora, feeling risky, hinted at the delicate nature of her research, Clara's curiosity was piqued. They met in a discreet cafe, the aroma of coffee and old books filling the air. Aurora showed her a copy of her great-grandmother's diary and the first clues. Clara listened with astonishing concentration, her eyes narrowed. My dear, this is dynamite, Clara finally said, her voice a whisper charged with emotion. These hidden stories, family secrets, are the true history of a country. Few have the talent and courage to unearth them. I will help you, for truth and for the memory of those who were silenced. The trust between them was quickly forged, based on mutual respect for knowledge and justice. Clara, with her vast contacts in the academic world and private archives, opened doors that would have been inaccessible to Aurora. She provided documents, taught her advanced research methods, and even gave her access to her personal library, an invaluable collection of ancient texts. Their conversations extended for hours, discussing the ethics of history, the fragility of reputation, and the indomitable force of truth. Don't stop, Aurora. This is not just a family secret. It's a lesson for everyone. Clara advised her, her voice filled with contagious passion. The second crucial ally was Leonardo, a young investigative journalist disillusioned with the superficiality of mass media, whom Aurora met by chance in a municipal archive while he was looking for information for an article on corruption. Their meeting was fortuitous. Aurora helped him decipher an ancient script that he was struggling with. Leonardo was impressed by her skill. Days later, when he was looking for a shocking story, Aurora dared to contact him. At first, he was skeptical, accustomed to unfounded rumors. But when Aurora, with Clara's help, presented him with the preliminary evidence from the diary, the records, and the coincidences, his eyes widened. This is a bombshell," Leonardo whispered, his voice charged with amazement and the gleam of a scoop. His motivation was not only journalistic fame, but a genuine thirst for justice and the opportunity to expose the hypocrisy of the elite. Leonardo, with his infiltration skills and digital tracking, became Aurora's eyes and ears in the outside world. He obtained discreet photographs, recordings of casual conversations, and public data that validated the connections. Interactions with Leonardo were tense and strategic, with secret meetings in quiet cafes or encrypted calls. They discussed every move, every possible reaction from the Altamiranos and De La Vegas. "We must be surgical, Aurora. One false step and everything crumbles," he warned her. She felt immense gratitude for these allies, who saw in her not the humiliated woman, but the brilliant researcher, the bearer of a crucial truth. Her internal monologue filled with gratitude. "I am not alone. There are good people, people who believe in justice. This is bigger than me, bigger than my pain. It is for everyone." Their hearts intertwined in the pursuit of truth, a truth that promised to change lives and unveil deeply rooted secrets. The tension reached an unbearable boiling point in the weeks leading up to Marcos and Valeria's grand engagement gala. Rumors of a supposed investigation by a spurned crazy woman attempting to defame the De La Vegas and the Altamiranos began to circulate through the halls of high society, reaching the ears of Marcos and his father, the patriarch Alejandro de la Vega, a man of steel with an impeccable reputation. Old Alejandro, who had buried the family secret under layers of prestige and power, felt a shiver of apprehension he hadn't felt in decades. Marcos, with his characteristic arrogance, dismissed the gossip. But a dull concern and growing paranoia began to nest in his mind. "It's just Aurora, Father," Marcos had said, with barely veiled contempt. "She's trying to get attention because she can't get over me." But his father's words, laden with unusual seriousness, made him doubt. "Marcos, some secrets are too old to be touched, and blood always tells. Make sure that woman doesn't get near Valeria." The first minor confrontation occurred at a charity art exhibition, which Aurora had discreetly attended with Clara, following a trail. Marcos, Valeria, and her father, Marcos's supposed uncle, were present, surrounded by an elite crowd. As Aurora observed from afar, Marcos spotted her in the crowd, his face contorted into a grimace of displeasure, and he approached her with firm steps, his smile forced and condescending. Well, Aurora," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper full of threat. I thought you had already understood your place. Are you here to admire what you can never have? Valeria's presence by his side, so radiant, so perfect, was a dagger in Aurora's heart. Marcos's words, each syllable laden with venom, caused a knot in her throat, and her hands trembled uncontrollably, her heart pounding with a thunderous force. For an instant, the old Aurora, the humiliated, the abandoned, felt the need to flee, to disappear. But Clara's gaze, firm and encouraging, from across the room, infused her with new strength. She straightened her shoulders, and her eyes locked with Marcos's with a chilling intensity that disarmed him. "Marcos," she replied, her voice serene but with a steel edge. "I am here to see what has always been mine, though you may not know it. The truth always finds its way." The surprise on Marcos's face was evident. His smile faded, replaced by a grimace of confusion and a pang of fear. Valeria, oblivious to the tension, asked in a sweetly ignorant voice, "Is everything all right, darling?" Marcos simply turned around, dragging Valeria away. Days later, a more direct threat arrived, an anonymous email with photos of Aurora entering and leaving Clara's library, and an unequivocal message. "Stop digging. Certain secrets are better left buried. Your family could suffer the consequences of your curiosity." Aurora felt an icy shiver run down her spine. Her hands, gripping the phone, were drenched in cold sweat. Her first instinct was to surrender, to protect her grandmother, her brother. Was she taking this too far? Anxiety weighed on her, and tears welled up in her eyes. But then, her grandmother's face, her voice whispering about the truth of your origins, and the image of Marcos happily oblivious, filled her with a chilling rage. "I will not yield," she told herself, the words a silent, firm promise. "This is not just for me. It's for justice. It's for my blood." Determination solidified in her soul. She knew the De La Vegas and the Altamiranos were scared. And that, paradoxically, gave her the strength to move forward. Her internal monologue became a strategic calculation. They are nervous. That means I am close. I have to go all the way. There's no turning back. It's now or never. The plan was ready. The air in the Grand Emerald Ballroom was an intoxicating mix of expensive perfume, champagne, and the false gaiety of the elite. Hundreds of guests dressed in their finest attire toasted the engagement of Marcos de la Vega and Valeria Altamirano. The glitter of crystal chandeliers reflected on the luxurious marble floors. Glasses clinked in a symphony of superficiality, and the murmur of banal conversations filled the space. Marcos, impeccable in his tuxedo, smiled with radiant confidence, holding Valeria's hand, who wore a silk dress and a diamond so large it looked like a beacon. Alejandro de la Vega, the patriarch, observed the scene with a satisfied smile, oblivious to the storm brewing. Aurora, dressed in a simple but elegant midnight blue dress that enhanced the serene strength of her gaze, entered accompanied by Clara and Leonardo. She positioned herself discreetly near the main podium, where the engaged couple would be presented. The moment arrived. Alejandro de la Vega took the microphone, his deep voice resonating through the hall. "Friends, family, it is an honor to celebrate the engagement of my son, Marcos, with the wonderful Valeria, a young woman who has brought light and prosperity to our family. A true blessing, a gift." It was then that Aurora stepped forward. Her heart pounded with the force of a war drum. Fear was an icy chill, but determination was a burning fire in her chest. She raised her own hand, the other holding a small antique wooden box, and her voice, though quiet at first, resonated with an unexpected authority that silenced the murmurs. "Excuse me, Mr. de la Vega," Aurora said, each word articulated with crystal clarity that cut the air like a blade. "I believe there is a gift that the Altamirano family has given yours, and which has not yet been fully revealed." Alejandro de la Vega's smile froze on his face. His eyes narrowed in a mixture of irritation and a pang of premonition. Marcos, seeing Aurora, felt his blood run cold in his veins, his face paled, and his body tensed. Valeria, confused, looked at Marcos, then at Alejandro de la Vega, then back at Marcos, as if seeking a denial on their faces. The crowd's attention shifted from the couple on the podium, from the fiancés, to the serene and enigmatic figure of Aurora. Aurora opened the wooden box. From it, she extracted her great-grandmother's diary, a handful of old letters, and a yellowed birth certificate. "Many decades ago," Aurora began, her voice taking on a narrative and solemn tone, "a woman named Clara Mendoza, my great-grandmother, lived a forbidden love with the then young Alejandro de la Vega. A love that bore fruit, a son, a secret, a son who was given to another family to preserve the untainted reputation of the de la Vega name and to keep the fortune intact." The impact was devastating. The hall fell into a silence so dense you could almost hear the beating of flies' wings. Alejandro de la Vega, the patriarch, staggered. His face turned white as chalk, and his eyes dilated in absolute shock. His free hand clung to the lectern, trembling, trying to utter a word, but only a choked gasp escaped his throat. Marcos, the arrogant Marcos, was petrified, his mouth agape in a grimace of disbelief, his eyes fixed on the documents Aurora held. He could feel cold sweat running down his back, a shiver of primal terror. His brain tried to deny what he was hearing, but Aurora's words, so clear, so logical, were hammers striking his conscience. "This birth certificate," Aurora continued, raising the yellowed parchment, "shows the date of his birth, the names of the biological parents hidden behind pseudonyms, and the rural clinic where he was born. And here," she held up a letter from her great-grandmother, "the detailed correspondence, the anguish of a mother forced to give up her child. This child was given to the Altamirano family." A murmur of astonishment swept through the room. Most did not fully understand, but they felt the weight of the revelation. "And you know, my dear friend," Aurora said with a dramatic pause, her gaze resting on Valeria, "the irony is that the Altamirano family, who adopted that child, who grew up with the Altamirano surname, never knew his true origin. Until now. Until the truth, so jealously guarded by Alejandro de la Vega, has come to light." Alejandro de la Vega's mouth opened and closed repeatedly, unable to utter a sound, his erratic eyes searching for an escape. "The date of birth, the place, the descriptions," Aurora continued, her voice unwavering, "all match one person in this room. A person who has lived her life without knowing that, in reality, she carries de la Vega blood in her veins, and who is about to marry her own brother." Valeria's choked scream ripped through the silence. Her face, once so serene, contorted into an expression of absolute horror. Her eyes, now wide and staring, fixed on Marcos, then on Alejandro de la Vega, then back on Marcos, as if seeking a denial in their faces. Tears welled from her eyes, streaking her impeccable makeup. "No, it's not true," she exclaimed, her voice barely a whisper that cracked with panic. Her body slumped, and only the quick reaction of a waiter prevented her from falling to the floor. The revelation, the fact that Marcos was her brother, had pulverized her. Marcos, at that instant, ceased to be the arrogant man. His skin turned a greenish gray, his eyes glazed over, fixed on Valeria, his fiancée, his sister. A pang of nausea ran through his stomach. He tried to stammer something. Valeria, no. This is a lie. But his words were inaudible, drowned out by shock and horror. His hands trembled uncontrollably, and cold sweat beaded on his forehead. The desperate attempt to regain control was pathetic, helpless. Alejandro de la Vega, the great patriarch who had kept the secret for decades, finally collapsed. His knees buckled, and he had to cling to the lectern to keep from falling. His breathing was short and ragged, and his eyes, at that moment, were those of a terrified man, a man whose entire life was crumbling before everyone's eyes. He whispered a word, a name. Clara. The truth of the past. His lover, his son, all exposed. The guests, who had previously murmured, were now in a deathly silence, their eyes wide open, watching the live drama, the biggest scandal they had ever witnessed. Some put their hands to their mouths. Others looked at each other in disbelief. The power dynamic inverted in a brutal instant. Aurora, the humiliated, the abandoned, stood as the bearer of a devastating truth, the owner of justice. Her voice was firm, her posture erect. The truth has been revealed, she said, her voice both a sentence and a liberation. Now, the veil of lies has fallen. The fall of the De la Vegas and Altamiranos was as abrupt as it was dizzying. The scandal, propagated by Leonardo's incisive reporting and the irrefutable evidence presented by Clara and Aurora, became the talk of the nation and internationally. Marcos and Valeria's engagement was annulled within hours, the trauma of biological kinship too overwhelming for both. The press, relentless, feasted on the story, exposing the hypocrisy and darkness of the social elite. Headlines screamed, "Incest at the top." De la Vega family secrets unveiled. Humiliated ex-girlfriend exposes truth. Alejandro de la Vega, the untouchable patriarch, was the first to fall. Media pressure and social disgrace crushed him. His business partners, fearing the stain on his name, withdrew their investments. His company's shares plummeted. The investigation branched into his finances, uncovering a series of tax evasions and murky dealings that had been covered up for decades. There was no prison for him, but an even more painful fall: social and financial ruin. He lost his properties, his mansions, his yachts. His health deteriorated rapidly, consumed by shame and remorse, his mind trapped in the labyrinth of his lies. The last time Aurora saw him in a magazine, he was a shadow of his former self, his face aged, his eyes empty, the brilliance of yesteryear completely extinguished. He died months later, a broken man, without his legacy or his honor. Marcos, the man who had abandoned Aurora for his ambition, was legally declared Valeria's biological brother, a fact that devastated him more than any material loss. The public humiliation was unbearable. His high society friends abandoned him. His calls went unanswered, the doors of exclusive circles closed forever. His career, which promised to be brilliant, vanished. His name, once synonymous with success, was now synonymous with scandal and depravity. Unable to face reality, Marcos fell into a deep depression, seeking refuge in alcohol and isolation. He became a pariah, a ghost of what he had been, his life reduced to a sad echo of his former glory. Images of him, emaciated, wandering the streets, leaked to the press, a public degradation that was as visceral as his rise had been unjust. Valeria, the innocent fiancée, also suffered the consequences. Although a victim of deceit, The stain of incest, albeit accidental, would haunt her forever. She withdrew completely from public life, unable to bear the looks of pity and judgment. She broke all contact with the De la Vega family and, in particular, with Marcos. Her life, once a fairy tale, transformed into a nightmare. She never married, and it was rumored that she lived secluded in a small rural property, far from the glitter of the society that had once adored her. The fall was brutal for everyone, a punishment that affected not only their fortunes, but their souls, laying bare the fragility of an empire built on deception. Aurora's triumph was a glorious sunrise after a stormy night. The De la Vega fortune, after complex legal battles in which Clara and Leonardo were fundamental pillars, was largely restored to its original lineage, through Aurora as its sole direct heir by her great-grandmother. It was not an economic victory, but a restitution of truth and justice. Aurora did not squander the money. Her first major act was to establish the Clara Mendoza Foundation for the preservation of historical legacy and document restoration. The foundation was dedicated to financing genealogical research, paleography, and the restoration of ancient documents, as well as supporting young women with hidden talents who, like her, had been underestimated or marginalized. Her new office, in a restored building that once belonged to the De la Vega family, was a sanctuary of silence and knowledge, its walls lined with shelves full of books and parchments, her desk impeccable, reflecting her passion and purpose. The impact on her family was immediate and profoundly healing. Her grandmother, in her last months, received the best medical care, surrounded by tranquility and love, and was able to die in peace, knowing that the truth of her ancestors had been revealed. Aurora's younger brother, who had had to work several jobs to support himself, could now dedicate himself entirely to his architecture studies, with a full scholarship from the foundation. Her grandmother's smile, the sparkle of pride in her brother's eyes, were the true treasure. Aurora's philanthropy did not stop there. She launched scholarship programs for young paleographers, understanding the value of such particular knowledge. She created community access centers for historical archives, democratizing access to history. Her legacy was not luxury, but opportunity, social justice. The significant reunions were the icing on the cake of her vindication. One morning, while visiting a museum where her foundation had funded a new manuscript exhibition, she ran into Camila, the same friend who had humiliated her in the boutique. Camila, now with a much more serious, almost fearful demeanor, recognized her instantly. Her face turned pale, her eyes avoided Aurora's, and she began to stammer an apology, clumsy and full of shame. "Aurora, I never meant, I'm sorry. You were always the smartest, I always knew it." Aurora looked at her with a calmness that was not condescending, but serene. "The past is in the past, Camilla," she said with a soft smile. "What matters is what we do with it." She left her there, an ashamed woman, while Aurora continued on her way, upright, with a clear conscience. Months later, she received a letter from Marcos. It came from a mental health institution. The words were broken, full of regret. "Aurora, there isn't a day I don't think about the harm I caused you. The cruelty, the irony of it all. You were the truth, and I abandoned you for a lie. I ask for your forgiveness." Aurora read the letter with a lump in her throat. There was no satisfaction in her heart, only a deep sadness for Marcos's tragedy. She forgave him, not for his sake, but for her own peace. Aurora's new life was a testament to purpose and healing. Her home, once a modest apartment, was now a historic residence, but full of life. with a large study filled with books, light, and the scent of old paper. Her inner peace was palpable, an aura of serenity that radiated. She was no longer the broken woman seeking validation from others. She was the architect of a new future, the bearer of truth, a story that transcended pain and became an inspiration for many. Aurora's story, my dear friend, is a powerful reminder that true wealth is not measured in gold coins, nor in noble titles one holds, but in the unbreakable strength of the human spirit, in the dignity with which one faces adversity, and in the audacity to seek the truth, however painful. Her journey is a profound lesson about the blindness of ambition, the fragility of appearances, and the ineludible nature of justice. She teaches us that a person's worth does not lie in the love denied to them, nor in the fortune snatched from them, but in the ability to rise from the ashes of humiliation, to transform pain into a motor for change, and to use knowledge, compassion, and integrity as their most powerful weapons. Aurora demonstrated that the darkest secrets cannot remain buried forever, and that truth, like an underground river, always finds its way to emerge and cleanse what is corrupted. Her legacy is not just one of recovered fortune, but one of awakened consciousness, an enduring inspiration for all those who once felt small, invisible, or betrayed. Her story is a beacon of hope, a testament that even in the most desolate moments, the light of truth can shine with unparalleled strength, transforming despair into a glorious rebirth. Years later, the Clara Mendoza Foundation was a global benchmark, and Aurora, beyond wealth, had become a living symbol of resilience and the immutable force of truth.